or what? Mitch Sherman at theathletic.com joins us. He covers Nebraska. Dylan Riola in Lincoln. There also was the story about Kyle McCord, which seems to have evaporated. And Nebraska has a quarterback commitment, who's also now looking around himself. Mitch, thanks for your time. Is there a positive that they're not being played, that the Huskers and Matt Rhule are not being played by Dylan Riola?
Never a dull moment, Smokey. I don't think that they're being played by Dylan and Dominic Riola. When you consider that Dominic, his father, is a former All-American at this school who has stayed very much connected with the program in the 2 decades plus since he has graduated and enjoyed his NFL career, and his brother Donovan, who's Dylan's uncle, is the offensive line coach. So, no, that's certainly not what's going on here. I mean, there's genuine interest and intrigue on the part of the Riola family, which has felt a pull to Nebraska. For as long as Dominic has been connected with the program, but when it comes to Dylan, for the last 2.5 years, he's been on the recruiting radar of Nebraska through coaching changes and interim staff, and now Matt Rhule going into year 2. They've very much been invested. This new staff has in Riola from the beginning, when he decommitted from Ohio State last December, a year ago right now, and then was on the radar for Nebraska. Then he was off the radar when he committed to Georgia in May, and now here in the 11th hour he's back.
Mitch, how does their pursuit of Dylan Riola affect their pursuit of a transfer quarterback?
Yeah, I think it just pretty much ends the pursuit of a transfer quarterback, at least in this part of the off season. We'll see where they're at with QB depth. Okay, first of all, we're jumping past the what needs to happen for them to feel okay next week, and that's that Dylan Riola, who's visiting Lincoln right now, flew in this morning from Georgia, that he does in fact go ahead and flip his commitment to Nebraska, signs with Nebraska next week, and then enrolls in class and is a part of this program in January. If you get to the spring, they've got 2 returning quarterbacks on scholarship who started games this past season. There were 3 who started games. 1, Jeff Sims, is gone to the portal already. So they'll assess where they're at, and perhaps you can get back to a spot in April or May where Nebraska's looking in the portal for somebody to add depth or to come in and be a mentor type if you're going to start a true freshman, which seems to be the direction that it's trending. But there's a lot to be determined between here on December 15th and what would happen next week, next month, when school reconvenes in March and April and spring practice, the portal after that, and then you get into camp in August. That's a lot of moments that are still difficult to predict.
Mitch, Nebraska finds itself there in kind of the top, the 20s, the top 25 of the recruiting rankings as it stands right now. Obviously, would get a big bump from a guy like Riola, but what's the feel around Matt Rhule's recruiting, and how does it stack up compared to recent years? Is there optimism? Is it growing? How do you see that right now?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting ebb and flow with this class, because he came in and it was a fire drill to put together that 2023 class, and they had 12 transfers that were a part of that group of newcomers and signed 20 some odd players. So a big group of new players last season. And then, signing day happened, and immediately it was, okay, turn the attention to 24, because this is where they can really sink their energy into and take time to get to develop relationships with the players in this class. And they shot high from the very beginning. It was all about Dylan Riola, and he was on the market. He was decommitted from Ohio State. And the thought when he decommitted from Ohio State, which happened shortly after Matt Rhule took over at Nebraska, was that the door was open for Nebraska. And Nebraska looked like the favorite at the beginning there, like this time 12 months ago, 9, 10, 11 months ago. And there was a ton of excitement and energy, not just around Riola, but around the guys that he enticed to come and visit Nebraska in March last year. They had a weekend in March where Riola was like the centerpiece of the recruiting weekend, but there were 4- and 5-star players from all over the country, like Ryan Wingo, the receiver from St. Louis, who's committed to to Missouri, like Brandon Baker and his teammate Nate Frazier, offensive lineman and running back from Santa Ana Mater Dei, who are highly ranked players, and others too. And really, when Riola pledged to Georgia in May, Nebraska had to reinvent the way that it was handling this recruiting class, and they went and got a local quarterback who you mentioned a few minutes ago, Smoky Daniel Kalin out of Bellevue, Nebraska, which is Omaha, and built the class around him with Midwestern kids. And there's a couple of top 100 players in it. It's a good group. It compares somewhat similarly to the kind of classes that they've signed when they've been healthy and, not on the verge of firing a coach. But adding Riola and maybe a couple pieces that he could bring with him would bump them up undoubtedly.
How in the world did they end up with such an atrocious turnover-plagued quarterback room?
Well, first they lost Casey Thompson, and that's where things started to go wrong. In retrospect, it didn't necessarily seem like it at the time. Nebraska made a choice again at this time a year ago to take Jeff Sims from Georgia Tech out of the transfer portal, and Sims had been up and down in his 3 seasons in the ACC and had some turnover issues early in his career, but seemed to have put those in the past last year and just needed a fresh start. And he's 6'4", 225 pounds, was an athlete who could get outside the pocket, do a lot of things in the offense that looked attractive to Matt Rhule and his OC Marcus Satterfield. And they didn't hand him the job, but they gave him every opportunity to win the job. And Casey Thompson, the former Texas starter, was coming off of a decent season, where he played okay. Nebraska didn't have a winning record in 2022, the season where Scott Frost was fired, but Casey was okay when he was healthy, and he wasn't healthy at the end of the year. So he didn't have an opportunity in the spring to compete with Jeff Sims, and Thompson went to the portal after the spring when he just knew that it was going to be a difficult battle for him to be able to start in his 6th season of college football. So he goes to Florida Atlantic, and Sims basically had the job, and they liked what they thought they liked what they had with him, but they didn't like what they saw on the field in the first 2 weeks of the season, and losses on the road at Minnesota and Colorado, and they turned the ball over 8 times, and Sims was responsible for most of that, and he got hurt, and they had 2 inexperienced quarterbacks behind him, and the next thing you know, they've turned it over 31 times, and which leads the nation, and their turnover margin was just about last in the nation. So that's how it happened.
What's other than locking down Riola, what is the next priority for them, or the most important thing that they get done here in the next week?
Well, their class is pretty much set. There's a few visitors who are coming in, and it's very likely that if Riola commits, or he may just announce on signing day, but people around the program are going to know, and I think other recruits are going to know his decision, whether it comes out publicly on Sunday or Monday, or he just waits until Wednesday to go ahead and sign and let everybody know then. It's very likely that they can add a couple of more pieces, but it's a numbers crunch right now, like it is with most teams nationally that have players who still have these COVID years on their resumes, and it's hard to get to. It's not a situation where you're trying to find bodies to get up to 85. It's like you're at 100, and then you got to find a way to get down to 85 by August, and that's the place that Nebraska's in. Not at 100 right now, but not far from it. And you can't add too many recruits to that at this stage. So if this process with Riola had happened where he went through having a change of heart and decided to flip, and it was like in August or September, Nebraska probably could have gotten more out of it as far as the other players that it was bringing in alongside him. It'll be somewhat limited. So the class is what it is for the most part right now, with the exception, obviously, of him and maybe 1 or 2 pieces.
Mitch, how did just the program kind of handle, Matt Rhule handle, and the fans handle that final stretch? I mean, it seemed like a bowl game was absolutely within their grasp, which would have been a great accomplishment there in year number 1, and then just that 4-game slide to end the year with some brutally close losses. I mean, I guess on the one hand, you're in every game, right? But on the other hand, like, how did that kind of go over that last month of the season?
Yeah, the fans and the players have been through that before, and they went through it during the Frost years, where you had close games and the rally cry was, hey, we're close, and so that doesn't really resonate that much. They're not really into losing close games. That's not desired outcome, and there's not a whole lot of happiness that comes out of that, especially when it was the situation that you mentioned in November where Nebraska gets to 5-3 going into the month, and it's just going to take one more win. And, Matt Rhule saying, hey, I don't just want to get bowl eligible. I want to win all the games. And they're like, okay, well, hey, let's go 9-3 or 8-4. And you end up 5-7 with November featuring November and the last part of October featuring, actually they stayed on, they were unbeaten in October. So it was all in November, three losses by a field goal and then another one in overtime at Wisconsin. And they all went down to the wire. The Iowa game at the end, where you still had hopes of getting to bowl eligibility. You throw an interception with 30 seconds left in the game, it's tied, and then Iowa gets really its only offensive movement of the entire second half and kicks a walk-off field goal with its backup kicker as time expires. Just like the most excruciating ways to lose, and that's been the story for Nebraska for a while, and that's the way it went with Rhule in year one. But people are still excited about him and like him and certainly like the way that he communicates and what he brings to the program and the demeanor that he has. He's very, very, very likable, as you guys know, and that's earned him a lot of, I would say a lot of patience, but it can't last forever. And, if we're sitting here having this discussion a year from now, for whatever reason, it's because the true freshman has a bad year, he gets injured or whatever goes wrong. If it's like this again, there won't be that kind of patience. So he has some urgency. There's urgency every year. There's urgency in year one, but it goes up in year two, and it will, no matter what happens here over the next week for Matt Rhule in 2024.
And we did ask him this the last time we had him on our show about maybe because the conference is changing, morphing at least a little bit of what you do schematically. Do you expect to see any of that? Because again, the Big Ten West is over, so you can't. Iowa's not going to be able to win the same way that they have. Minnesota's going to have to change. Like all these schools, Wisconsin's the first one who made the, kind of the big flip, but you still have to deal with the stadium you play in and the weather you'll play in, especially in the wintertime. But do you expect to see some morphing to maybe what they do and the kind of players that they try to bring into Nebraska?
Yeah. I mean, they ran the offense that they did last season out of necessity because of injuries, not just at the quarterback spot and experience at the quarterback spot, but injuries at wide receiver and defections at wide receiver. Nebraska lost one of its best receivers who just walked away from football during training camp in August. And then the injury started in the opener. And suddenly they've got true freshmen out there who were asked to be starting games when they expected these guys to redshirt or maybe work their way into backup roles where they played in more than 4 games, certainly not starting. And those guys progressed, and that's going to help Nebraska down the road that they got that experience, but it didn't help them in 2024. So they had to resort to this kind of makeshift offense and change on the fly, and they're running the option and, doing things that Satterfield, the offensive coordinator, was not comfortable with. Nebraska ended the season throwing on average more passes than only Air Force, Army, and Navy in the entire FBS. So that's not where they want to be, and that's not where they're going to be if Dylan Riola is the quarterback. They're not bringing him in to run the option. The option will be out. That's it. That's not the quarterback that he is. You will not see that play in the playbook. They'll run more of a pro style system. They're not going to go air raid. I can't see that. It's not like Phil Longo at Wisconsin where you just do it's a complete flip with what your philosophy is, but they're going to throw the ball, and that's going to be the future no matter who the quarterback is. Certainly, if it's Riola next year, then you'll see him put it in the air, considerably more than what we saw in 2023.
All right, Mitch, let's wind it on down with the real big story in Lincoln. What's the buzz for the volleyball national championship game in Nebraska and the Texas Longhorns?
Yeah, that's really all the buzz. I mean, if this wasn't the week before signing day and you had the top quarterback in the country or the number 2 quarterback in the country on an official visit, everyone would be talking only about that. And really everyone is talking about volleyball. You saw on TV last night the arena full of red in Tampa as Nebraska took out Pitt in the semifinal and wasn't really challenged. So now they get Texas. And, they've been down this road before. They're historic rivals and have met 2 other times in the national championship match with Nebraska winning both, but Texas has had its moments for sure where it's got the best of Nebraska, just not on the absolute biggest stage. So it's great theater, great drama. I mean, either way for Nebraska after it won last night, you're either going to play Wisconsin, which has been its nemesis in the Big Ten, or Texas, which is its arch enemy, like across the board, from the Big 12 days, and volleyball is at the top of that list. So, there's going to be a lot of people watching, I would imagine, on Sunday in your state and in the state that I'm in, and probably around the country, just because of the entertainment value and the storylines. And this is a team, this Nebraska team is one that has for sure captured the imagination and the hearts of all Nebraska fans, from the beginning of the year when they played in front of 92,000 people at the football stadium all the way up until this weekend in Tampa.
Mitch, thank you. There'll be like 19,999 whatever in attendance. They'll have massive ratings. Texas, the defending champion. Obviously, with Skinner, she's fantastic. Unless they're the defending national titles, the number 2 seed. They're playing for the national title against Nebraska, who has been number 1 most of the year. They beat Wisconsin, but also were swept by Wisconsin, who Texas just hammered, and they did last night in the semifinals. Coming up next, great